The room shimmered with crystal chandeliers and soft golden light, the kind of expensive glow that made everything look just a little unreal. Laughter floated through the air, mingling with the faint clink of champagne flutes. Elena Marquez stood near the edge of the crowd, her fingers loosely curled around a glass she hadn't touched. She wasn't supposed to be here. Every instinct told her she shouldn't be. But life had a strange sense of humor. The invitation had arrived 2 months earlier, creamy and embossed, the sort of thing that screamed important event before you even read the names. She'd stared at it for a long time, unsure if it was a mistake. But no, there it was, his name, Daniel Reed, her ex-husband. And beneath it, in flowing script, the name of the woman who had been a shadow in their marriage long before Elena knew she existed. She'd almost thrown it away. Almost. But the universe has a way of whispering to you at the strangest times. And something inside her said, go, not out of revenge, not to start a scene, just to see. Now here she was, standing in a ballroom that smelled faintly of roses and money, surrounded by people she used to know and people who didn't know her at all. The music shifted into a soft piano arrangement. The MC's voice announced that the groom was about to speak. Daniel looked exactly as she remembered, perfectly pressed suit, hair just slightly longer than when they'd been married, a smile that always seemed crafted for an audience. He took the microphone, glancing at his new bride with what looked like practiced adoration. Then his eyes swept across the room and landed on her. Just for a moment, something flickered their surprise, maybe annoyance, before his smile returned. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, he began, voice smooth as silk. It means the world to us to celebrate this new chapter surrounded by such exceptional people. The kind of people who know what it means to reach for the best in life. It was subtle at first. A pause, the faintest curl at the edge of his mouth, and of course, some familiar faces from the past. He added, tone light but edged. People who, well, let's just say, not everyone is built for this kind of world. Some people are content staying small, being nobody. A ripple of polite laughter moved through the crowd. The sound hit her like a slap. He didn't have to say her name. He didn't have to. Everyone knew. Elena's chest tightened, but she held her expression steady. She had learned long ago that showing pain only gave people like Daniel exactly what they wanted. She let the moment pass, her eyes fixed not on him, but on the enormous doors at the far end of the room, because just then, they opened. The hum of conversation shifted, rising like the first stirrings of a storm. A sleek black car had pulled up outside, something so polished it seemed to drink in the light. A man stepped out, tall and effortlessly confident, dressed in a tailored suit that whispered quiet authority, the kind of presence that turned heads without asking for attention. The staff moved quickly, parting the crowd as if they already knew. He wasn't the kind of man who waited for introductions. Elena's heart beat faster, not because she was nervous, but because she knew exactly what was about to happen. Daniel was still holding the microphone, still in the middle of his carefully crafted toast, when the newcomer reached the edge of the dance floor. He stopped beside Elena, offering her a smile that was warm and genuine, the kind of smile that told you he saw you not as a relic of the past, but as someone worth standing beside. Every head in the room turned. Daniel's voice faltered for the first time that evening. Elena, the man said, his voice low but carrying in the sudden hush, sorry I'm late. Shall we? She set down her untouched champagne, slipped her arm through his, and together, they walked toward the very center of the room. The music swelled again, and the only sound louder than it was the collective murmur of astonishment. In that moment, she didn't need to say a single word. Not to Daniel, not to anyone. The look on his face, the way his carefully constructed confidence cracked, was enough. She had been called a nobody, but as she stood there, with the eyes of the entire room fixed on her, she realized something. The people who try to shrink you are only revealing the limits of their own vision, and tonight, those limits were on full display. What Daniel didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that this was only the beginning. Elena woke the next morning with the faint scent of roses still clinging to her hair, a reminder of the night before. The city outside her window was waking up, slow and golden. Unaware of the silent storm still humming beneath her ribs, she stood in her kitchen, coffee in hand, and let the events of the wedding replay in her mind. The look on Daniel's face, that flicker of uncertainty, almost disbelief, had been a small, quiet victory. But it wasn't the kind of triumph that happened overnight. There had been a time, not long ago, when the thought of facing him, or anyone connected to that world, would have made her curl into herself. She hadn't been born with the steel in her spine she carried now. It had been forged, piece by piece, in the months after their marriage ended. That it hadn't been a gradual unraveling. It was a single moment, sharp and final. She had come home early on a gray Thursday, the kind of day where the air felt heavy and expectant. She'd planned to surprise Daniel with dinner, something warm and comforting, a pause in the constant rush of their lives. But when she walked into the kitchen, she found his laptop open on the counter, the screen glowing in the dim light. Her first instinct had been to close it, to respect a boundary she thought still existed between them. But her eyes caught on a message that seemed to burn in bold letters. One line: "You're so much more exciting than her." The rest unfolded in an instant, scrolling through message after message. A hidden life spilling out in front of her. Dinner she hadn't known about, trips she hadn't been invited on, and threaded between it all, a casual dismissal of the woman she thought she was to him. Words like ordinary and comfortable dressed up as jokes. She remembered sitting on the edge of their bed that night, staring at the framed photos on the wall, smiling faces in Paris, the two of them at a friend's wedding, her in a dress she'd chosen because Daniel liked the color. None of it felt real anymore. When she confronted him, he didn't even flinch. There was no apology, no scramble to explain, just a tired sigh, as though he'd been waiting for her to catch up to something. He'd decided long ago. "Elena, you're fine," he said, as if he were talking about a restaurant that served decent food, but nothing special. "But I've changed. I want more now, more." The word lodged itself in her chest like a splinter. She'd built a career from nothing, worked late nights and weekends to keep her event planning business alive. She'd supported him when his career faltered, tightened their budget so he could take risks. But now more apparently meant someone else entirely. The divorce was swift, almost cold in its efficiency. His lawyers spoke for him in clipped phrases. He pushed for the bigger share of their assets, dismissing her business as a hobby. She fought for what mattered: her business, her independence. But by the time it was over, she was left with a mortgage she could barely manage and a bank account that made her stomach knot every time she checked it. The weeks after were a blur of quiet moments that felt too loud. Mornings spent staring at the ceiling, nights filled with half-eaten meals. She would sit at her desk, the phone silent, wondering if maybe Daniel had been right. Maybe she wasn't built for more. It was Jessica, her oldest friend, who finally pulled her out of the fog. Jessica had been there through everything: college exams, late-night talks, the awkward first years of marriage. One afternoon, she showed up at Elena's door with takeout and a look that brooked no argument. "You're allowed to fall apart," Jessica said, setting the food on the table. "But you're not allowed to stay there. You've worked too hard to let him be the final chapter in your story." Elena wanted to believe her. But belief is hard when you've been dismantled piece by piece. Still, something about Jessica's certainty made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. It started small: a coffee meeting with an old client, a quick job decorating a private dinner party. She poured herself into the details, not because she thought it would save her, but because it was something she could control. Then came the call that would change everything. A charity committee was in desperate need of an event planner for a gala. The original planner had dropped out last minute, and a mutual acquaintance had given them Elena's name. It was the kind of event that could make or break a career: high-profile guests, media coverage, the kind of budget she'd only dreamed of. She almost said no. The fear of failing, of proving Daniel right, was a heavy weight. But Jessica's voice echoed in her mind: "You've worked too hard to stay here." The first planning meeting was held in a glass-walled boardroom overlooking the city. Elena sat at the far end of the table, listening as the committee rattled off names and expectations. She scribbled notes, keeping her voice even when she finally spoke. "I understand you want something memorable," she said, meeting their eyes one by one. But you also want something that tells a story, one that makes people feel connected, invested. If we do this right, it won't just be an event. It'll be an experience they'll talk about for years." There was a pause, then a slow nod from the man at the head of the table. His name was Adrien Cole, and though he introduced himself simply as a supporter of the cause, there was something in his gaze measured, assessing that made her feel like he saw past the polished surface to something deeper. When the meeting ended, he lingered behind, hands in his pockets. "You have a way of making people listen," he said, almost as if it were an observation rather than a compliment. Not many do. She didn't know then how significant that moment would become, or how their paths would keep crossing. All she knew was that for the first time in months, she walked out of a room feeling a flicker of the person she used to be. And somewhere, deep down, a new thought began to take root, not about Daniel, not about the past, but about the possibility of building something so remarkable that no one would ever again mistake her for nobody. The week of the gala crept closer like a tide she couldn't hold back, each day bringing a new list of problems to solve, details to refine, and people to persuade. Elena had never been one to shy away from hard work, but this was different. This was her shot, the kind of opportunity that could either catapult her business into the realm she'd once only dreamed of, or confirm every quiet doubt that had whispered to her in the dark since Daniel left. The city seemed to hum with anticipation. Every morning she woke before the alarm, mind racing with images, velvet drapes, gold-rimmed glasses, cascading floral arrangements that seemed to spill from another century. She pored over floor plans, sketched centerpiece designs in the margins of her notes, and hunted for the perfect string quartet willing to learn a new arrangement in just 3 days. Her phone never left her side, and every call felt like another thread in the tapestry she was weaving. And through it all, there was Adrien. He wasn't hovering or interfering, but somehow, he was always there at the edges, quiet, watchful, offering resources when she needed them, but never imposing. When the lighting company tried to push back on a custom order, Adrien made a single call, and the problem evaporated within the hour. When a shipment of imported linens was held up at customs, a courier appeared the next morning with exactly what she'd requested. He never explained how. He didn't have to. It should have been intimidating, working with someone like him, a man whose name opened doors in worlds she'd never stepped into. But he didn't carry himself like someone looking down from above. If anything, he seemed interested not in the event itself, but in watching her work, like he was studying the way she pieced chaos into elegance. Late one evening, as the staff cleared away the remnants of a tasting session, he lingered in the doorway of the ballroom. They'd been transforming. The chandeliers were still dark, but the space glowed with the soft light of scattered candles they'd been testing. "You move like you're seeing something the rest of us can't yet," he said, his voice low in the quiet. She glanced up from her notes, unsure how to answer. "That's the job," she said lightly. "You have to see the ending before the rest of the world catches up." His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Not everyone can. There was something in his tone, curiosity, maybe even respect, that lingered with her long after he'd left the room. The night of the gala arrived like the first inhale after holding her breath too long. Guests stepped out of sleek cars into a wash of golden light, their voices echoing against the marble entrance. Inside, the air was thick with music and the scent of thousands of flowers, arranged in careful layers so that no matter where someone stood, the view was perfect. Elena didn't have time to admire it. She was everywhere at once, making sure the servers moved in unison, checking that the speeches were cued, smoothing out the tiniest details before anyone could notice. The guests smiled, glasses in hand, but she knew the real judgment came from their silences, from the way their eyes lingered on each corner of the room. It was halfway through the evening when she noticed him, Daniel. He hadn't been invited. She knew the guest list by heart, but there he was, standing near the champagne tower, dressed in the kind of sharp suit that once might have impressed her. His arm rested casually on the back of a chair, his attention scanning the room as though he were measuring its worth. Their eyes met briefly, and she felt the faintest echo of the old ache. Not the longing, those days were long gone, but the sting of recognition, the reminder of how far she'd come from the woman he'd once so easily dismissed. She didn't approach him. She didn't need to. Instead, she turned toward the stage. Where Adrien had just stepped up to speak, the crowd quieted instantly, his presence commanding without effort. He spoke about the cause they were supporting, his words steady, deliberate, and without the hollow flourish so many wealthy donors relied on. And when he paused, his gaze slid toward her, just for a heartbeat, before he continued. After the applause, people surged forward to shake his hand, to thank him, to be seen in his orbit. She stayed at the edge, scanning for the next thing that needed her attention. But she could feel Daniel's eyes on her. That was when it hit her he wasn't looking at Adrien. He was looking at her. The realization was both unsettling and strangely satisfying. Not because she wanted his attention, those days were gone, but because she could feel the unspoken question radiating from him. How did she get here, near the end of the night? As the last toast was made and the final notes of the quartet faded, Adrien crossed the room to her. "You did it," he said simply. She looked around at the lingering guests, at the way they seemed reluctant to leave, as though the spell of the evening had been too strong. "We did it," she corrected, but he only shook his head. "No, this was yours. I just made sure the rest of the world saw what I already did." The words landed with a quiet weight, heavier than she expected, because somewhere in the middle of seating charts and flower orders, she had stopped thinking of herself as someone proving Daniel wrong. She was proving herself right. As the lights dimmed and the staff began clearing the tables, she caught Daniel, still lingering by the door. He gave her a slow, assessing look before turning to leave. For the first time in a long time, she didn't care what he thought. What she didn't realize then was that this night, this single, breathtaking success wasn't the peak. It was the foothold, and the climb from here would take her somewhere Daniel could never follow. The city had a different glow after the gala, as if the air itself carried a whisper of possibility. Elena woke the next morning not to the weight of exhaustion, but to the hum of something she hadn't felt in years: momentum. The reviews had already begun circulating through the networks. That mattered. Guests had shared photos on social media with captions dripping in praise. One columnist called the evening a masterclass in elegance. Another dubbed her the name to know for events that redefine luxury. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. New inquiries filled her inbox: private parties, corporate retreats, weddings in remote villas overlooking turquoise seas. Some of them were small, others massive. But the common thread was that they wanted her. Not because she was available, not because she was convenient, but because her name now meant something. She tried to keep her head level, reminding herself that a single successful event didn't guarantee anything. But as she scrolled through the messages, she couldn't help the flicker of pride warming her chest. It wasn't just that people were calling, it was who was calling. That afternoon, as she sifted through contracts at her desk, the glass door to her office opened, and Adrien stepped inside. He was dressed down for once, no tie, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a quiet ease in his stride. "I should have called first," he said, though his tone made it clear he wasn't actually asking permission. "But I was in the neighborhood." She gestured toward the chair across from her. "You mean you were to neighborhoods away and decided to take the long route?" His smile was faint, but it was there. "Maybe. I wanted to see how you're handling your sudden rise, trying not to drown in emails," she admitted, and resisting the urge to say yes to everyone. "It's tempting," but as she shrugged, "I want the right projects, not just any projects." He leaned back, studying her with the same measured gaze he'd had in that first boardroom meeting. "That's good. Most people don't realize early enough that saying yes to everything is just another way of losing control." They spoke for nearly an hour about business, about the way her industry operated behind its polished facade, about the kind of clients worth building a future around. Adrien didn't lecture. He asked questions that made her think in bigger arcs, in years instead of weeks. Just before he left, he paused in the doorway. "There's a charity auction next month," he said. "Different crowd than the gala, more international. I think you should be there." She almost told him she didn't have time, but something in his tone stopped her. "As a guest." His eyes held hers for a beat. "As my guest." The words lingered after he was gone, curling through her thoughts as she went back to her work. She wasn't sure what he meant by them, whether this was business or something more. But she knew one thing: She wasn't the same woman who would have overthought it, until the opportunity passed. In the weeks leading up to the auction, she worked on to new projects, both high-profile, both demanding in ways that stretched her skills. She met clients in rooftop gardens, in dimly lit lounges, in airy spaces that overlooked the ocean. She noticed the way people's expressions shifted when they heard her name, the subtle flicker of recognition. Daniel's name surfaced once, in passing, at a client lunch. A woman seated across from her mentioned him as if he were just another acquaintance in the business world. Elena smiled politely and let the conversation drift on. It wasn't that she didn't care, it was that she cared less and less with every passing day. The auction night arrived with the promise of spectacle. The venue was an old opera house, restored to its former glory, but lit in modern, moody tones. Guests arrived in waves, draped in evening wear that seemed more art than clothing. Adrien met her at the entrance, and for a moment, the hum of conversation dimmed. His hand rested lightly against her back as they walked in, and she could feel the quiet weight of the room's attention shifting toward them. He introduced her to people she'd only ever read about: restaurateurs with Michelin stars to their name, philanthropists who funded entire hospitals, designers whose work graced international runways. Each introduction was seamless, as though he'd been weaving her into this world without her realizing it. Halfway through the evening, as a rare painting was being bid on, he leaned toward her. "Do you see how they look at you?" She glanced around. "They're looking at you. They're looking at us," he corrected. "But here's the thing, you're not just here because of me anymore. They're curious about you. They want to know why I brought you. And the answer isn't charity." His words sank in slowly, like water into dry ground. She realized, in that moment, that whatever this was between them, whatever he was offering, wasn't about saving her. It was about opening a door she'd already proven she could walk through. When the final item of the night was sold, and the applause faded, Adrien guided her toward the balcony overlooking the city. The air was cool, the streets below dotted with the warm glow of street lamps. "You know," he said quietly, "the first time I saw you, I thought you were just someone passing through my orbit. Now I see you're building one of your own." She didn't respond right away. The city stretched out beneath them, alive and endless, and for the first time in years, she felt like she belonged to it, not as a guest, but as someone shaping it in her own way. And deep down, she knew this wasn't the climax of her story. It was only another beginning. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she wondered if Daniel had heard her name in these circles yet. She wondered what he thought, but then the thought faded, replaced by something stronger. She was no longer running from her past. She was walking, steadily and deliberately, toward a future that didn't need his shadow to define its light. Rain-slicked streets reflected the city lights like liquid gold as Elena sat in the back of a car, watching them blur past the window. She had just left a client meeting that felt more like a victory lap than a negotiation, the kind where the client doesn't just want your services, they want you, your vision, your touch. A year ago, she would have been grateful just to get her foot in the door. Now, doors seemed to open before she even knocked. The pace of her life had shifted into something almost unrecognizable. Mornings began with strategy calls across time zones. Afternoons blurred into site visits for events in places she once only saw in glossy magazines: vineyards in France, coastal estates in Greece, glass-walled skyscrapers in Dubai. Her work had grown beyond planning. She was curating experiences, crafting moments that seemed almost impossible until they stood shimmering in front of her. But it wasn't just her business that had evolved. She had. The hesitations that once kept her second-guessing every move had faded into a quiet certainty. She no longer entered rooms wondering if she belonged. She entered knowing she had something valuable to bring. And yet, there was one constant in all this change: Adrien. He appeared in her world like a quiet thread tying everything together, not overshadowing her success, but weaving into it in ways that felt both intentional and effortless. Sometimes they were simply two professionals moving in the same rarefied circles. Other times, the space between them seemed charged with something unspoken. It was on a late summer evening, during an outdoor fundraiser on the grounds of a sprawling countryside estate, that she felt the shift more than ever. Lanterns swayed gently in the warm breeze, scattering light across the lawn. The air carried the faint scent of jasmine, and the sound of a live jazz band drifted through the night. She had been speaking with a well-known art dealer when Adrien appeared at her side, his presence as steady as the horizon. "Walk with me?" he asked, a subtle invitation wrapped in that unhurried tone of his. They stepped away from the clusters of guests, moving along a gravel path lined with roses. For a while, they didn't speak. The quiet between them wasn't awkward, it was something else, something that made the air feel alive. "You've been everywhere lately," he said finally, glancing at her. "And yet, somehow, you're still here." She smiled faintly. "I'm learning to be in more than one place at once. That's a rare skill," he said. "But it's not just the places, it's the way people talk about you now. They're not just impressed, they're intrigued. That's harder to earn." She looked ahead at the path, the flickering lantern light dancing in his eyes when she glanced at him. "And what about you? Still just a supporter of Cuz's?" His expression shifted, something like amusement crossing his features. "Let's just say there's more than one way to invest in the future." She didn't push for more. If Adrien had secrets, and she suspected he would share them when he wanted to. By the time they returned to the main gathering, the band had switched to a slow, lilting melody. Guests swayed on the makeshift dance floor under a canopy of lights. Without a word, Adrien extended his hand. She hesitated only a heartbeat before taking it. They moved in time with the music, the rest of the crowd blurring into the background. For those few minutes, there were no client lists, no schedules, no shadows from the past, just the rhythm, his steady hand at her back, and the quiet knowledge that whatever this was, it was no longer something she could neatly label. Later that night, back in her apartment, she found herself standing by the window, looking out over the city. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jessica. "Saw the photos from tonight. You're glowing. Don't tell me it's just the lanterns." Elena laughed softly, typing back, "Maybe it's the lanterns. Maybe it's something else." The truth was, she wasn't entirely sure herself, but she knew her life had begun to take on a shape she never could have drawn back. When she was struggling to pay her mortgage, wondering if she'd made a mistake chasing her own business. The doubts were still there sometimes, but they were quieter now, overshadowed by the momentum she'd built. Still, there were moments, fleeting but undeniable, when her mind drifted back to Daniel. Not with longing, not even with anger, but with a kind of detached curiosity. Did he know where she was now? Did he hear her name spoken in rooms he thought she'd never enter? The answer would come sooner than she expected. It happened at a private dinner for a luxury travel brand she'd been consulting for. She walked into the candlelit dining room, the air warm with the scent of roasted herbs, and froze for just a fraction of a second. There he was, Daniel, laughing with a small group near the bar, looking entirely at ease in his tailored jacket. He hadn't seen her yet, but when he did, his expression shifted. It wasn't shock, not exactly, more like surprise laced with something he couldn't quite mask. She met his gaze for the briefest moment, then turned to greet another guest as though he were nothing more than background noise. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversation and laughter, but she could feel his presence hovering at the edges, and when she left, she caught him watching her go, a question in his eyes he didn't have the right to ask anymore. As her car pulled away, she realized she no longer needed to wonder what he thought. The look on his face had said it all. Whatever came next, she was ready for it. The past had lost its grip, and the future was hers to define. The morning of Daniel's wedding dawned sharp and clear, the kind of crisp air that seemed to strip the city of all its shadows. Sunlight spilled across Elena's bedroom floor, stretching toward the garment bag hanging from the door. She'd had it delivered the night before, custom-tailored, elegant without being ostentatious. A piece that moved like it belonged in any room it entered. She hadn't planned to attend. The invitation had been a surprise in itself, arriving in an envelope heavy with gold embossing. At first, she'd assumed it was some sort of administrative slip, a name left on a guest list by accident. But no, the calligraphed letters were deliberate, her name written with a flourish. Jessica's voice had been immediate in her ear when she'd told her, "You're not seriously going, are you?" But there was no anger in Elena's choice to say, yes. This wasn't about confrontation or vengeance. This was about reclaiming the narrative about walking into a space where, once, she'd been made to feel small, and letting her presence speak for itself. The car arrived right on time. Adrien was waiting inside. His suit as effortlessly perfect as always. When she stepped in, his gaze swept over her once. Steady and approving. "Ready?" he asked. She exhaled slowly. More than ready. The venue was an old heritage estate on the edge of the city, its manicured gardens stretching toward a stone terrace, where guests mingled in the early afternoon sun. Strings of white flowers cascaded from tall arrangements, and the air hummed with the polished murmur of small talk. As the car rolled to a stop, she caught the first flickers of attention. Heads turned. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. A photographer, unsure of who she was but unwilling to risk missing a moment, lifted his camera. Adrien stepped out first, offering his hand. The moment her heels touched the cobblestone, the shift was palpable. The two of them together carried a presence that rippled through the crowd like a silent wave. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. Inside the main hall, laughter and music floated beneath the vaulted ceilings. Daniel stood near the front, deep in conversation with a guest, but his attention faltered as his eyes caught on the entrance. His smile froze. It had been years since she'd last seen him this close, but the details were unchanged. The precision of his suit, the calculated ease in his posture. What was different was the hesitation that flickered, almost imperceptibly, across his face. "Elena," he said when she reached the edge of the crowd, her name shaped carefully, as though testing how it still felt to say it. She met his gaze, with the same calm she'd carried into every boardroom, every gala. "Daniel." There was a pause, filled by the distant swell of music from another room. He glanced at Adrien, recognition dawning, and something in his jaw tightened. "I see you've met Adrien Cole." Adrien's tone was polite but edged, with something firmer. "We've worked together for some time now." The exchange was brief, but the unspoken weight in it was impossible to miss. Around them, murmurs passed quietly from one guest to another, curiosity sharpening in the air. When the ceremony began, Elena took her seat without another word, the late afternoon light spilling through the tall windows. She didn't watch Daniel. She watched the way the golden glow caught in the glassware, the way the flowers swayed gently as if nodding to some secret rhythm. Afterward, during the reception, she found herself surrounded by strangers who seemed suddenly eager to know her, where she worked, who she knew, what she had planned next. She answered graciously, offering just enough without revealing more than she chose. It was near the center of the room, beside the towering wedding cake, that the moment happened. A group of guests laughed at something Adrien had said, and she turned slightly, catching Daniel watching her from across the floor. Not with the easy arrogance she remembered, but with the unsettled look of someone seeing a picture that no longer fit the frame they'd placed it in. She didn't look away. This time, she let the moment stretch, not with triumph, but with quiet clarity. He had once called her a nobody, and for a while, she had believed him. But now, standing there in a room that seemed to bend around her presence, she knew the truth. When Adrien rejoined her, he leaned close enough that only she could hear. "You've already won, you know." She smiled faintly. "This was never a competition." "No," he agreed. "But it's still good to see the score." They stayed a little longer, speaking with guests, enjoying the music, letting the evening flow around them. When they finally stepped back out into the cool night air, the garden was lit with tiny golden lights, the scent of the flowers lingering like a last note of music. As the car pulled away, Elena looked back once, not at Daniel, not at the grand estate, but at the path she had walked to get here. A path that had taken her from silence and doubt to a place where her voice carried weight, where her name opened doors she had once thought were locked. The road ahead was wide and waiting, and she no longer measured her worth by who chose to stand beside her. She had built something no one could take away, and as the city lights rose to meet them, she realized the most powerful part of her story wasn't that she had arrived, it was that she had done it entirely on her own terms.